The military ER at St. Urban buzzed under harsh red lights. SEAL Commander Briggs, a massive man, was wheeled in on a gurney, his uniform ripped, blood soaking the bandages. The young surgeon approached. He roared, his voice thick with pain and rage. "I won't let a child cut me open." All eyes turned to the small-statured doctor, ready at the operating table. She said nothing, only rolling up her surgical sleeve. On her arm appeared a small, dark, unmistakable SEAL Trident tattoo, the version reserved only for elite Special Forces combat medics who served under fire. The entire room froze. Briggs gasped. "Dr. Hale?" Dr. Aria Hale, 27 years old, was the newest and youngest trauma surgeon at St. Urban Military Hospital. She was the best they had seen in years and also the quietest. She was an anomaly. Small stature, gentle demeanor, and a past locked down tighter than a secure vault. But the anonymity was a shield. She was an ex-SEAL combat medic, an elite field surgeon who had rotated through the most hostile environments in Somalia and Yemen, operating with minimal light and resources. Her civilian life at St. Urban was a carefully constructed fortress of anonymity, a desperate attempt to find peace. She had left the service 3 years prior after the catastrophic Night Echo mission, a blur of chaos and grief that cost her 3 of her closest teammates. That loss, that failure to save them, was the reason she now sought refuge in the sterile, predictable world of civilian medicine. Commander Briggs, 48, was a living legend within the Navy SEAL community. He was a man defined by the rigorous, unforgiving standards of combat. He trusted only those whose mettle had been tested and proven by the desert sand and enemy fire. He had no faith in youth, in inexperience, or in quiet competence, viewing them as fatal liabilities in a life-or-death scenario. Aria had transferred to St. Urban just 4 months ago. On her first day, the staff saw her and immediately made assumptions. Whispers followed her down the hall like a persistent shadow. "Trauma surgery? That girl looks like a resident intern. She's younger than most of our nurses. Can she even handle a knife in a code situation?" Aria heard them, but never fought back. She simply offered a faint smile, a non-committal gesture that confused them further. She was good, exceptionally so, but she went out of her way to avoid attention. She volunteered for the worst overnight shifts, the complex cases no one else wanted, and the endless, thankless paperwork. She lived out of the staff sleeping quarters, perpetually exhausted but always ready. Her department head, Dr. Morgan, a skeptical man with a deep suspicion of overachieving youth, called her in for a meeting early on. "Dr. Hale, your service record is quite heavily redacted. Several pages are entirely blacked out." Aria met his gaze calmly. "I apologize, doctor. Portions of my military file remain classified under specific service parameters. I cannot legally open them." Dr. Morgan frowned, his professional suspicion deepening. "I hope you aren't relying on some past, unverified achievement to carry you through here. This is St. Urban, not a field hospital. Young doctors often make careless mistakes due to overconfidence." She gave a small, respectful nod. "I understand, sir. I will earn your trust solely through my work." For 4 months, she worked in silence, letting her actions speak. She moved through the ER like a ghost, unseen until she was needed. She sutured lacerations with blinding speed and near-invisible precision. She handled hemorrhagic shock with an instinctual efficiency that was unnerving. During one particularly gruesome night shift, a victim of a high-speed car crash came in with a ruptured spleen. The senior surgeon hesitated, immobilized by the complexity. Aria took over the table. She didn't shout. She issued precise machine gun commands, calling for instrument transfers seconds before they were physically ready. The whole procedure, which should have taken 2 agonizing hours, was completed in 90 minutes. The patient survived. A recovering patient once asked her, "Dr. Hale, your hand isn't shaking, even when you're doing microscopic work. Do you ever get nervous?" Aria replied simply, "Not when I'm working. I'm used to functioning in the dark, where errors are permanent." But her youth, her size, and her silence were powerful barriers. They continued to see her as the timid rookie, dismissing her professionalism as luck or unnatural coldness. Until that morning. Commander Briggs was carried in, a victim of a deep penetrating blast injury near a forward operating base. The legendary SEAL was screaming, his eyes wide and panicked. Not from the pain, but from the fear of an unqualified civilian. I need a real doctor, someone who has seen combat. This person looks too young to even rent a car. Arya was already scrubbing in, her face impassive. She ignored the outburst. She knew this type of soldier. They don't respect words, they respect truth. She would give him the truth, but only once his life depended on it. A seasoned surgical nurse, who had worked ER for 20 years, later recounted, Dr. Hale scared me that morning, not because she was cold, but because she was so incredibly calm. When everyone else was yelling, she lowered her voice. She looked like she'd seen things far, far worse than blood and chaos. The gravity of the situation was immense. A high-ranking SEAL commander's life was now balanced on the razor edge of an operating table, and the surgery was about to rip open Arya Hale's buried past, revealing a secret that could destroy her new life. Briggs saw Arya approach, a sterile drape in her hand, and his adrenaline surged into panic. He thrashed against the restraints, his eyes wild. Stay away from me. I won't let you touch me. Get a real surgeon with actual battle experience. Dr. Morgan, standing by the console, quickly whispered to Arya, his voice laced with panic. Dr. Hale, please, step aside. I'll take over the incision. His public profile is huge. He's going to sue the hospital. We can't risk this fight over pride. Arya ignored the plea. Her eyes were locked on the monitor, then quickly down to the X-ray screen. Her calm vanished, replaced by the chilling, hyper-focused intensity of the battlefield. Doctor, the fragment is actively migrating. Look. She pointed to the screen with a gloved finger. It's eroding the descending aorta and pressing on the superior mesenteric artery. We have minutes, maybe less than 5. If we stop for a handoff or a paperwork argument, he will bleed out on the table before the chief surgeon gets here. Briggs, barely able to breathe, managed to issue his final, desperate demand. I need someone who has walked point, someone who knows what it means to cut without a safety net. Arya closed her eyes for a single, long second. She let the mask of the quiet doctor fall away. She made a choice that would expose her to the world, but save the man. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled her scrub sleeve past her elbow. The small, dark, stylized SEAL Trident emerged, clearly visible against the pallor of her arm. The sight was a punch to the gut of the room. A scrub tech gasped, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. Dear God, that's a Special Forces patch. It's the Combat Medic Trident. It means field service under fire. Briggs stared, his mouth forming soundless syllables of shock. His eyes, though hazy with pain, were intensely focused on the indelible ink. The fear in his eyes instantly dissolved, replaced by a desperate, agonizing recognition. He mumbled, barely a whisper. Hale. Specialist Hale? Yemen? Night Echo? Arya inclined her head, accepting the inevitable exposure. The quiet doctor was gone. The ghost medic was back. Yes, Commander, it's me. Now, if you want to live, you will stop moving. The entire operating room was suspended in disbelief. They were witnessing a high-level military drama unfold in a civilian setting. Briggs's breath hitched, a wave of profound relief and unexpected sorrow washing over his strained face. You're alive. We were told you were lost forever. Arya's eyes softened momentarily, connecting them through a shared terrible history. It was a shared memory of a mission that was supposed to have claimed both their lives. Commander, Arya said, her voice snapping back to the frigid, commanding tone of a field officer. I need to operate now. Your life is critical. Do I have your consent? Briggs closed his eyes, his breathing slowing, accepting his fate in her hands. He wasn't giving consent to a young doctor. He was giving an order to his trusted medic. Anna, my life is yours, Doc. Go. Arya was instantly transformed. Her movements were no longer careful. They were continuous, fluid, and violent in their efficiency. She didn't request instruments. She commanded them. Her voice was sharp, a weapon in itself. Scalpel, suction, full power, retractor clamps, number 4 and 6. Morgan, You're assisting on exposure, anesthesia, prep for massive fluid replacement, anticipate third spacing. For the next 90 minutes, she controlled the operating room like a SEAL commander running a hot exfiltration. Her tone was sharp, her commands were absolute, and her focus was a terrifying thing to behold. She directed the scrub nurses, the anesthesiologist, and even Dr. Morgan, who found himself meekly following her orders, realizing his place was secondary to her experience. She worked in a deep, tight cavity, maneuvering around vital organs with practiced ease, quickly isolating the damaged vessels. She located the fragment, stabilized the tissue, and flawlessly performed the tricky arterial repair. The suture line was a work of art, executed under crushing time pressure. Briggs's vitals stabilized. The crisis was averted. Dr. Morgan, sweat pouring down his temples, watched her finish and clean up. He spoke softly, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and professional fear. "Dr. Hale, you never once mentioned your special operations background. That kind of experience, you could have walked into any job in the country." Arya pulled off her gloves, her face returning to the guarded calm of the hospital doctor. "I came here to heal, doctor," she said, her voice quiet again, "not to carry the weight of the battlefield in every conversation. Now Commander Briggs needs observation." The anesthesiologist, a veteran of several thousand procedures, remarked to a colleague later, "When she was folding linens, she was a mouse. When she held that scalpel, she wasn't a doctor. She was a warrior. The finest combat surgeon I have ever seen. She saved him because she refused to respect the rules of the room." The shock of the SEAL Trident reveal was immediately compounded by the depth of the buried past, and the secret reason Briggs recognized her, setting the entire hospital hierarchy on its head. After Briggs was stable and lucid in the ICU, he requested an immediate private meeting with Arya. When she entered, he dismissed the nurse and looked at her for a long time, his eyes filled with a grief and gratitude that only combat veterans share. "I thought you were dead, Arya," he repeated, the words thick with emotion. "When we pulled out, the area was saturated. Command told us you were gone." Arya sat beside his bed, leaning close. I also believed I was dead, Commander. Parts of me were. The truth of Night Echo and the cost of survival." Briggs began to reveal the agonizing truth of the mission that had defined both their lives. It was a vicious close-quarters ambush. When the secondary blast hit the compound, you were covering Private Miller. You shielded him. The impact threw you against a wall. We saw the head wound, the severe shoulder trauma. When we were forced to exfil, we couldn't reach you. The enemy was closing fast. Command ruled you MIA, presumed KIA. He paused, reliving the moment. "It was the worst 20 seconds of my career." Arya squeezed her eyes shut, the images flickering in her mind. Not memories, but reports of a life she couldn't fully claim. She hadn't died. "I was found by a family," Arya explained, her voice raw. "Not militia, just civilians. They recognized the medic patches and carried me across the border. They saved me. But the head injury, it wiped me clean. I had severe dissociative amnesia. I spent nearly a year in a village clinic, not knowing my name, my rank, or my language." She had returned to a U.S. embassy eventually, but the trauma was immense. Her records were immediately classified. The military had a living asset with top-tier tactical knowledge and severe memory gaps. The resulting file was sealed under the highest classification. No one, civilian or military, was to be granted access. The military simply had to wait for her to recover enough to decide her own fate. "I have been searching for you for 2 years, Doc," Briggs confessed, "not just to save you, but because your loss broke the moral fiber of my team. We needed to know you were alive." Tears streamed down Arya's face, the first she had shed since leaving the field. The truth was not that she failed, but that she had suffered an unimaginable fate and paid a terrible price for survival. But the past was about to cause problems in the present. The hospital board of directors, obsessed with minimizing legal risk, convened an emergency hearing. The administrator, Mr. Hayes, was determined to terminate Arya for operating without prior civilian authorization, effectively accusing her of professional misconduct. Dr. Hale is too young, Hayes stated, his voice ringing with self-importance to the 12 board members. She lacks sufficient civilian experience for this trauma level. Her credentials are, quite frankly, incomplete and unverifiable. A clear breach of protocol. The door to the boardroom swung open. Commander Briggs, now dressed in his crisp navy dress whites and leaning heavily on a cane, strode in, flanked by two highly decorated Navy officers and a staff judge advocate. He was pale but resolute. The presence of the Navy brass immediately silenced the board. "Gentlemen," Briggs began, his voice cutting through the stuffy room like a knife. "Dr. Hale is young because she was operating in active combat zones since she was 19. Successfully performing procedures that most of you here couldn't read in a textbook. She lacks civilian paperwork because the rest of her file is sealed under top secret classification." He then placed a small, heavy velvet box on the mahogany table. Inside lay a gleaming, highly ornamented medal, the Bronze Star with Valor, which had been held in reserve until her status was resolved. "This is the award for saving 3 lives under fire, including her own," Briggs said, his gaze sweeping the stunned faces. "She saved my life yesterday by ignoring your protocols. She's the only reason I'm standing here today. The Pentagon's mandate and the power of Code 7B. As the board members stared in stunned silence, the staff judge advocate, a serious man with 4 stars on his uniform, stepped forward and placed a sealed red-bordered dossier on the table. "This is an official memorandum from the Department of Defense, gentlemen," the officer announced. "Dr. Aria Hale is operating under Special Forces Medical Code 7B. This code grants her non-revocable surgical intervention authority in all emergency and trauma situations, military or civilian, overriding local hospital protocols until she chooses to formally resign that status. The sheer staggering authority granted to her, a single humble combat medic, was higher than that of the entire hospital directorate. She had the unilateral power to save lives by fiat of the highest military authority." The hospital director's face went white. He and the board members immediately began offering stammering, self-serving apologies. Aria, however, showed no trace of mockery or anger. She was above petty grievances. "I don't want praise or titles or special treatment," she said, her voice filled with quiet dignity. "I only want to be allowed to work and to save people without delay. Every second you spend arguing policy is a second a life is being lost." A junior intern who witnessed the exchange was deeply affected. "That day I understood why they called her the Ghost Medic. It wasn't just because she was missing from the battlefield. It was because she returned to civilian life asking for nothing, yet commanded the entire room just by standing silent. She was the one true professional in the room." The news of the Ghost Medic's vindication and the revelation of her unique military mandate quickly spread beyond Washington, becoming a national human interest story. The hospital that once scorned her became her fortress, and its culture began to fundamentally change. The attitude toward the younger doctors and nurses at St. Urban shifted dramatically. Suddenly, seniority mattered less than proven competence. Appearance and age were no longer metrics for judgment. Dr. Morgan, now Aria's strongest advocate, publicly apologized and insisted she take a leadership role in redesigning the ER protocols. The hospital administrators, profoundly humbled, did not just apologize. They established the Hale Protocol, a revolutionary program that allowed emergency intervention without bureaucratic delays, based entirely on the assessing doctor's real-time professional judgment, particularly concerning severe penetrating trauma. However, the protocol met immediate resistance from old guard surgeons. "We can't just bypass the chain of command, Morgan. It's reckless. It exposes us to liability," one senior physician argued at the monthly review. Dr. Morgan silenced him, pointing to a slide detailing Briggs's case. Dr. Hale ignored the chain of command and saved a legend. If she had waited, he would be a casualty. The Hale Protocol isn't reckless, it's responsive. It empowers the person with the best skill set, not the highest rank, to take control immediately. Aria stepped in, her demeanor calm but firm. "The protocol is simple. If you can justify your intervention based on a 3-minute critical window, you act. If you cannot, you follow procedure. We train for this." The battlefield is not the only place where seconds matter. The success was undeniable. Within 6 months, St. Urban's ER had the highest critical save rate in the region. A young resident, whose previous ideas had been repeatedly dismissed, approached Arya with gratitude. "Thanks to you, Dr. Hale, they've given us the autonomy to act faster, to save more people. You changed the culture from one of fear to one of action." Commander Briggs, now walking without a cane, stood before Arya one afternoon in the hospital garden. His eyes were clear, his body mended, but his spirit was forever tied to hers. "We need you back, Doc," he said, his voice earnest. "The teams need a leader like you, a medic who thinks like a commander." Arya smiled, a soft, accepting expression that rarely touched her face. She looked out at the busy hospital, at the lives she was touching every day. "I belong to the battlefield, Commander. The mission was all-consuming, but now I belong to the place that heals. I can serve here, rebuilding what the war breaks, one life at a time." Briggs nodded, a deep understanding passing between them. He understood that she wasn't running from the war. She was fighting a new one, a battle for life itself. "Then we will make sure this place protects you," he vowed. He began bringing in retired SEAL personnel to conduct high-pressure, realistic simulation training for the entire trauma staff, turning St. Urban's trauma unit into an elite training ground for stress management and decisive action. They taught the staff how to function without complaint, how to process immediate, shocking failures, and how to reset for the next patient. Arya embraced her new role. She no longer hid. She taught, she mentored, and she led. Her leadership style was a perfect synthesis of military precision and civilian empathy, demanding excellence, yet incredibly supportive of human frailty. She found her initial mocker, the hospital director, Mr. Hayes, in the hallway one day, looking defeated after receiving a reprimand from the board. He mumbled a broken apology about his previous prejudice. Arya stopped him. "Judgment is the enemy of healing, Director. Both on the battlefield and in the hospital, we move on. Your role now is to support the protocol that saves lives, regardless of who enacts it." She had won not by fighting back, but by working, by saving, and by demonstrating competence that was beyond question. Her legacy was not the medal, but the new, non-judgmental ethos of the hospital. If you believe that true strength lies not in age or title, but in the quiet courage to act and save a life, type in the comments, "I will live kindly." 1 year after the dramatic helicopter rescue, Dr. Arya Hale was the acknowledged chief of tactical emergency response at St. Urban. She led an elite team trained to the standards of special operations, translating the speed of combat medicine into civilian trauma care. She had finally found peace, not by running from her identity, but by fully embracing the blend of the warrior and the healer. She was training a group of young residents on mass casualty triage. A young, nervous doctor named Leo approached her afterward, his hands trembling slightly. "Chief Hale," Leo whispered, anxiety catching in his throat. "I'm afraid I'm not good enough. When the pressure hits, I freeze. I'm terrified I'll make a fatal mistake." Arya turned, her gaze compassionate, yet intensely focused. She took the young man's trembling hand, grounding him in the present moment. "I am afraid every day, Leo," Arya said softly. "I was afraid when I had to make the first cut on Commander Briggs's chest. I was afraid when I had to choose to walk away from my team's memory. Fear never fully disappears. It's a natural signal." She then taught him a simple technique she had learned in the most hostile environments: the 3-second reset. "When the panic hits," she instructed, her voice calm and absolute, "you stop. You name 3 objects in the room, 3 sounds you hear, 3 textures you feel. It takes 3 seconds. In that moment, Leo, you are not a scared person. You are an information collector. You convert panic into data. Then you move. Trust your training." Leo performed the simple exercise and felt the profound shift in his nervous system. The discipline of the body had quieted the chaos of the mind. Commander Briggs, now fully recovered, often visited. They would stand on the roof of the hospital at sunset, watching the air traffic. It had become a tradition, their silent way of honoring the past. That tattoo on your arm, that little piece of ink, It reminded me I had a lifeline. It reminded me why I believed in life, even when I was bleeding out, Briggs said, his voice low with reflection. Arya looked down at the trident, no longer a secret, but a source of strength. And that surgery, Commander, reminded me why I left the battlefield, to heal what the war breaks, not to break what the war heals. Their bond was not friendship, but a profound connection forged in shared trauma and mutual salvation. They were two survivors standing watch over the wounded world. A year later, Arya's quiet competence had finally outshone the initial judgment. The young doctor who was once dismissed as a child was now the pillar of the trauma unit. The final scene, Arya stands in the brightly lit corridor after a successful multi-hour surgery. She pulls off her gloves, her movements smooth and economical, leaving no trace of her effort. On her sleeves, she rolls down her scrubs. The small SEAL Trident gleams under the fluorescent light, briefly catching the shine of the setting sun through the window. No longer a sign of a hidden past, but a visible, permanent symbol of her service and her commitment. The hospital loudspeaker crackles, announcing an incoming emergency. Arya takes a deep, calm breath, a faint smile touching her lips. She adjusts her mask and begins walking. "I am old enough to save lives," she whispers to herself, the statement of final, perfect resolution. "And strong enough not to need the proof ever again." Arya Hale didn't need external validation to prove her worth. She needed to embrace her past trauma to realize her current purpose. Her story is a testament to the quiet strength carried by the underestimated and the profound transformative impact of choosing compassion over judgment. If you believe courage still lives in everyday heroes, subscribe to the Veteran Story. Real people are creating and telling stories, not mass-produced AI.